We acknowledge the land on which we sit and which we call the North Clackamas School District rests on the traditional and indigenous lands and village sites of the native peoples of the Kalapuya, Chinook, Malala, and the Clackamas. We take this opportunity to offer gratitude for the ability to learn, work, and be a community on this land, and we offer thanks to the original caretakers of this region. We recognize the historic policies of colonization, genocide, relocation, and assimilation that affected Indigenous and Native families, both past and present, and that will affect those in the future, and honor the resilience and revitalization of our Indigenous and Native communities. We pay respect to our elders, both past and present, who have been the stewards of this land throughout the generations.
Thank you. Directors, please rise. And Director Dobson, will you lead the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag tonight?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. This is a special board meeting to interview candidates for positions on the North Clackamas Budget Committee. The School District Board, in consultation with the Educational Equity Advisory Committee, must select at least one member of the Educational Equity Advisory Committee to serve on the School District Budget Committee. The board declared Budget Committee positions 8, 11, and 14 vacant at its September 21st, 2023 meeting. Applications were made available to the public with a deadline of October 13th, 2023. We received 25 completed applications. Board members have independently reviewed and scored each of the applications. The four candidates being brought forward tonight scored the cumulative highest. We will bring one candidate in at a time, with our board asking the same 7 questions of each candidate. Each candidate will have 15 minutes to answer the questions. Upon completion of the interviews, board members will score each candidate. A rubric has been provided, and voting will be in open session at the next board meeting, Thursday, November 9th, 2023. Simona Beatty, we will begin with Simona Beatty. Welcome, and thank you for applying and for joining us this evening. Oh yeah. All right, thank you. So welcome. We're going to start out with our questions. So briefly explain your understanding of the public school budgeting process in Oregon and the role of a budget committee member.
Yeah, so briefly, well, this should be, it's a very much a public process, and the budget committee serves a very important role, which is to provide another set of eyes to the budget. Once the district submits their budget to the board, the budget committee reviews it and makes sure that all of it makes sense. All the recommendations make sense. So I feel like the budget committee is that additional checkpoint for the community to understand it, and to also make sure that we're putting forth a budget that is both sustainable and an appropriate use of public funds.
Thank you.
Great. Hi. Okay. The second question, how would you prioritize funding allocations within the school district's budget to ensure the needs of students, teachers, and staff are met? Also, how are the NCSD strategic plan and the core values applied to budgeting needs?
Yeah, these are very incredibly deep questions. So I'm going to start with, first of all, I'm a parent in the school district. My son just started kindergarten. So this is the first time I've been on the parent side of the house. I've served districts, I've served at least one district in the state of Oregon. I also work in K-12, and so this is very dear to my heart. And to be able to be of service now as a parent on this side is extremely important to me. And so here's where I sort of find priorities when it comes to budgeting and allocating of resources. I think if there is a great way to understand where the greatest needs are among students and focusing our funds, it should be student-centric. We should be focused on how do we best provide resources to students to essentially create positive outcomes for them, how to remove those barriers within that are maybe budgetary based, that we can help do that. So what I'm looking for in a budget, when the superintendent presents a budget, I'm looking for, are we eliminating those barriers? Are we looking at how do we fund sustainable programs and resources in a way that meets the needs of all students in this district? And also finds opportunities to accelerate learning, to be able to help students that are in the greatest of need in a way that also accelerates learning for all students.
How should a school district address transparency and accountability in budgeting and financial decisions? Also, why is this important?
Yeah, so this one is actually one that is very sort of the backbones of my work. So one thing around transparency, I think there needs to be a clarity around how we're going to communicate the budget to the public. For example, when I served for Salem Kaiser Public Schools, one of the initiatives was how do we take a 500-page budget and make it relatable to a community that, one, they're not accountants, they're not chief financial officers. This is not what they live and breathe every day. So how do you take such a complicated and complex subject as public funding and translate it to a community in a way that creates transparency and in a way that helps our community understand what's in the budget to make those decisions? So one, I feel one of the roles that I would serve on the budget committee is being the role of a translator. So how do I take this complex information and make it relatable and translatable to other parents in my neighborhood, other parents in my community, in a way that I can make sense of all of the nuances that go into a district budget, and to explain, where do we have areas that we can actually provide feedback and decisions around a budget, and where are areas such as restricted funds that we really don't have much say over. They are restricted for a reason. So that's the area where I'm looking for transparency, is how do we talk about the budget in a way that's relatable, that invites people in, creates engagement, and actually makes people feel like they have a decision in what's being done with the budget. So
Thank you.
Okay, question number 4. The budgeting process includes a variety of stakeholders, including other budget committee members, district administrators, and the public. Can you describe a situation that demonstrates your ability to work collaboratively with many stakeholders and how you would apply that experience to this role?
yeah, so I'm happy to provide examples from my role. I currently do public relations for NWA, which is a global K-12 assessment and education research organization. As part of that, I have stakeholders across from researchers to teachers to superintendents to the press, and constantly having to sort of, explain challenging and complex information to those publics. But for Salem Kaiser, I'll give a wonderful example, and that's very much budget committee related, very much budget related. Several years ago, we were looking to pass a construction bond at a time when voter approval was almost like we did a community survey that's the community pretty much said, we don't want to give you any more money. We don't trust how you're allocating it. So we had a trust issue on our hands. So what we did was, well, what's the number one reason why do people not trust our budget? And they said, we just don't know how you spend, we don't understand it. So part of my work there was to make, again, this very complex budget relatable to the community. So I had to work very closely with our chief financial officer. I asked him, help me talk about this budget. I said, explain it to me. He's like, here you go. And he handed me the 500-page document. And I said, this is lovely, but no one will understand this. So we sat for months at a time and just went through it page by page and created language that everybody could understand. Then we created materials for our internal stakeholders, so our teachers, our bus drivers, our custodians, anybody that we knew was a community point of contact with our district. And then we trained them on the materials. We helped them talk about the budget in a way that was relatable and that they could answer questions, including creating a budget guide for the community. So that was across stakeholders. That was internal. Then we took it out to the public. We talked to community groups. We talked to advocacy groups. We talked to church groups. We talked to anybody that was interested in understanding our budget more deeply. And all of that took collaboration. All of that took deep engagement with those community members. So.
What strategies are most successful for engaging and involving the community in a public budgeting or resource allocation process? And how would you contribute to this effort?
Yeah. Oh, this feels awfully like a job interview, but these are wonderful questions. Around the strategies, I think the way that I've brought people into projects, the way that I believe people are sort of engaged in is one is finding common ground. Why are we all here and what purpose do we serve together, and finding that common ground. Across parents, we care about our students, we care about our children. Can we start there? And if we can do that around the budget, why is the budget important? Why do we, want to have people be engaged? I also am a strong believer in following sort of what are the expectations around engagement. So if someone's brought into a meeting, what are we asking them to do in that point in time? What sort of feedback do we need from them? And then of course, follow-up communications is key. How are we going to use that feedback? What did we do with that feedback? And that's all sort of around building that trust to ensure that we are working as a community together. And I think the more we approach that from a point of curiosity about each other, about what brings it, what motivates us, what engages us in the process, I think that's a strategy that I like to engage, especially around difficult and complex projects. So.
Budgeting often involves making tough decisions about allocating limited resources. Can you provide an example from your experience where you were involved in making difficult financial decisions with limited resources and several high priorities? How did you handle it?
Yeah, so I like to start with a clear criteria around what is it that we are trying to accomplish, what are our goals, and essentially create a decision matrix that is very much centered on what is our priority order? If we have this, can we do that? And using that criteria then makes it easier to make those decisions, even the tough ones, to say, yes, this was a tough decision, but this is what we based it on to make it a fair and equitable process.
All right, thank you. So do you have any questions for us, Simona?
One of the questions that I had around the budget committee, assuming that I am selected for this, is, the training involved. What is the time commitment around that? And is there training, I guess, and kind of what is the process to be part of the budget committee?
So we have informational meetings, and Donna, do we have the calendar available? She's asking about. So we have several informational meetings before the actual budget message comes out. So yes, because there's a lot of, again, as you've stated many times, it's a lot of information, and you get this giant notebook. But we definitely have. Do we know how many? Is there 3 or 4? We're pulling up the calendar to see how many informational meetings there will be. And they're usually surrounded by, part of it is just things that they want to, that the Financial Services Department wants to make sure that we understand, that the Budget Committee understands. And then it can also be follow-ups from questions that Budget Committee members or board members have.
Okay, I'm pulling up the calendar now. Just a second here. So there will be informational meeting on March 12th, April 2nd, and April 16th, with April 30th is the first Budget Committee meeting, and May 14th is the second Budget Committee meeting.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, so it'll be 5 meetings in total, and they're here. And then, of course, as we're given that information and we have any questions, then at the following meeting, the Financial Services Department will make sure that we have the answers to those questions, and maybe even sometimes it's a complex answer, so there might even be a little bit of time to give a short presentation and explain it.
I also just wanted to let you know you will be meeting with the Executive Director and Chief Financial Officer like on a one-on-one meeting, Matt McCara. So,
Okay, great.
okay.
Yeah. The other question I had was, as the board, what sort of, for the budget committee, because we're a collaborative world, what is it that you look for, or what's your top priority for a budget committee? What do you feel is their number one role to you? Yes.
I don't know if I can speak for everyone. I think that we're really looking for people that want to have a true understanding of the district budget, and also wants to find ways to get that message out to our community, because as you stated, it's a very big document, and it's a complex process for people to understand when they don't live and breathe school budgeting every day. So I think it's very important to have people that have a new perspective, but then also want to be involved in that transparent process and getting that message out to our community. Any other directors have something to say about that? Okay.
You may also just want to look at our website and the school board. There's several, and there's a lot of information about the budget process and things like that.
Perfect, yeah. And one last question, I promise. I was just curious for North Clackamas, what is the top financial issue that you feel like you're going to be facing in the next year, 2, 3 years, I guess, would be? If you were to sum it up, assuming the levy doesn't pass, or does, so.
I think our biggest issue is just stable and adequate funding, just
Yeah.
overall.
I know the fiscal cliff's coming, so yes,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
a big question on everybody's minds, but yeah. Oh, and where are you in your contract negotiation? Like, where is that world? I can't remember where you are on the timeline with contracts. Collective bargaining, I guess. I mean, I know that's the news
That
right
will
now.
not be
so
my
that's-
area, but Chief of Staff Tiffany Shireman can answer that.
The Chief of Staff of Clackamas Schools, our Teachers Association has a contract in place, negotiating not all of schools.
Okay, so you've got some.
Our class
Oh, wow.
for a contract that ends.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right,
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And if there's anything else, let me know.
Thank you so much for your time. All right, do we have Sarah Howell here? Welcome. Thank you for applying and for joining us this evening. Go ahead and take a seat. And just so you know, that green button, we want to make sure that the light is on so that we know your mic is on. All right, well, welcome. Okay, excellent. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here. So briefly explain your understanding of the public school budgeting process in Oregon and the role of a budget committee member.
Well, I don't have a lot of understanding, just what I kind of gleaned from the website yesterday when I read the budget document and the process. But, generally I would assume it's, you have probably revenues from taxes and from, state appropriations, which you have projections for. And you're probably getting those in if you're on a June 30th calendar year. You would be getting that stuff kind of ready in the next couple of months. You'd be starting to look at those projections in January, and then you'd start looking at your inflationary expenditures, from that point forward. And then at some point, based on what you have coming in, both from your levy, your taxes, your state appropriations, any external funding or restricted funding you have, you would start kind of backing into your budget and going from there. Those are kind of probably the nuts and bolts process. And then from a budget committee standpoint, that's the committee that kind of looks at the overall, are you hitting the target? Are those numbers aligning with your strategic plan and goals? Do you have risks that need to be addressed? And then it does sound like the committee works on community engagement, right? Do they understand the budget? Is the budget message clear? Is it something that someone can kind of, a normal person with the community can kind of get from here to there with those technical numbers? So that's kind of what I got from it, and I hope I'm close.
All right, thank you.
Okay. How would you prioritize funding allocations within the school district's budget to ensure the needs of students, teachers, and staff are met? And also, how are the NCSD strategic plan and the core values applied to budgeting needs?
Well, I would imagine that, first and foremost, you're looking at your education core services, that those would be the first that you kind of look to. Direct instruction, classroom sizes, classroom time, those things would be prioritized first. I do think that you probably would have also, and this would be facilities. You have to keep your structures and your facilities and campuses looking the way that they need to be able to serve students. From there, you kind of go, I guess it kind of broadens from there, right? What things are core things that, or maybe ancillary things that serve students the most. What kind of specialized services are really critical to the district? You probably would want to be looking to at some of the metrics, right? Are you too heavy on administration, those kinds of things? And are you keeping them within kind of the range that you would expect them to stay in? But I mean, I would imagine that that's kind of where you would want to prioritize is, what is the direct classroom, where does that money go directly in the classroom to support the classroom activities?
Question 3. How should a school district address transparency and accountability in budgeting and financial decisions? Also, why is this important?
Well, I think that a school district is a highly public and political entity. I mean, not that the school district wants to be political, but I think the fact that it is public, and such an integral part of the community, that the transparency that it's held to is higher than what most public corporations might be held to. And then it's really important, I think, from the message that they send too, is clear for people to understand and it doesn't get misinterpreted. And that the way that that's done is, in a way that's inclusive and clear, and open to feedback and in kind of, conversation. There are complicated things in budgets, right? That, unless you're kind of knee deep in it, you don't always understand. And it's really hard to explain those things to folks, particularly if you're in a situation where, funding is very tight and you have to kind of explain bad news. That makes it even more difficult. And it's particularly challenging, I think, when you do it and to the, it's not like, a private corporation doesn't have to do this to the public, right? They have a different type of conversation. So it is a lot harder to do that in a public setting. I hope I answered your question.
Okay, question 4. The budgeting process includes a variety of stakeholders, including other budget committee members, district administrators, and the public. Can you describe a situation that demonstrates your ability to work collaboratively with many stakeholders and how you would apply that experience to this role?
Yes. Currently, in my current position where I work, I work as the director of budget and financial planning for OHSU. And so in that role, I often have to work with many different stakeholders across the organization, have conversations with them about what's happening in the budget and, why their funding is moving one way or another. And then often we'll also work with folks sometimes when they have new ideas and they want to, pitch something and, kind of laying those numbers out with those folks and saying, okay, well, we can go left or we can go right. And these folks have a variety of backgrounds professionally and just experience. And so I think it takes, kind of some diplomacy a little bit. You have to be able to articulate what you're trying to say. And sometimes you don't hit it on the mark the first time and you got to come back and do it again. Sometimes you hand people data and they look at it and they're like, what are you talking about? And you've got to come back and do that again. But I think it's collaborating and continuing those conversations, asking questions, being curious and inquisitive. Those have been my approaches with people, especially when we don't find common ground right away. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of more conversation, some talking through it, and you don't always agree at the end of the day, but you can at least kind of come to it like, okay, I understand where you're coming from. Thank you.
What strategies are most successful for engaging and involving the community in a public budgeting or resource allocation process, and how would you contribute to this effort?
We do present our budget publicly in board meetings, but we don't have the same level of community feedback, right? We don't have to post it publicly and say, oh, provide community. So I'm kind of going off the, this is what I would think. I think the strategy, I think that there's some strategies where, it's about conversation and kind of marketing it. And marketing is probably the wrong term, but I think from my perspective, what I could contribute is, we do a fair amount of graphic representation of data, how to represent the data in such a way where it's easy to be digested by people. I did go through the budget document. It's there's lots of content in that document. And I think that, it could be maybe presented in a way that might be more graphically pleasing to folks so that they could look at it quickly and get a message from. I think the strategic plan stuff looks really nice from that perspective. I can look at it, I can pick up exactly what you're trying to say. It's marrying the numbers to that in a way that might be, particularly if you have to communicate something that might be hard, right? So that would be one of the strategies I would want to think about deploying.
Okay, this is the last question. Budgeting often involves making tough decisions about allocating limited resources. Can you provide an example from your experience where you were involved in making difficult financial decisions with limited resources and several high priorities? How did you handle it?
I think one of the toughest things that we had to do was during the pandemic. We had to make a lot of very quick decisions. We had to make a lot of reductions in budgets very fast. And I think that was a very challenging time to pull that information together and then get it out to people, explain why we were doing it, what we were doing it, when we were going to do it. And we were changing things every, 30 days. And so that was probably one of the hardest experiences that we've had in terms of landscape changing and not, not being quite as sure. Normally in the budgeting process, we kind of have a sense, here's how much we're going to have. And, we start kind of prioritizing things with people, and it's a pretty collaborative process that we have. But yeah, that was definitely an instance where, we went through and reduced the pay for 5,000 employees. And that was tough to do that on such a global scale. So I hope I answered your question.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Sarah, do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, my first question can you just describe a little bit more about what the role and responsibility is of a committee member?
I'm trying to say it, trying to not just say it off the top of my head. So I'm just going to read this part of the website. It just says that the law mandates public involvement in budget preparation and public exposure of proposed programs. It requires that we have a balanced budget that is projected resources must equal projected requirements in each fund. It takes several months, and it involves both building-based and central staff. Once we develop the budget, which the superintendent presents it, and the budget message to the budget committee, and then that's where we review the proposed budget and receive public comment. So the Budget Committee recommends revisions to the budget if needed and approves the budget for the school board adoption. The first Budget Committee meeting to review the proposed budget is generally held in May. And then, as we had talked about earlier, there's those 3 informational meetings before the actual budget message is read.
And what kind of skill set are you really looking for? Like if you could pick like the perfect skill set, what are you looking for? What expertise would you really value to be on the committee?
I think that we're all, that's a difficult one because there are 5 of us up here, and of course, we're all just looking for valued members of our community that are interested. And we have a certain set of look-fors that we will go over in the next week because we will vote next meeting. So, yeah.
I don't know that I have any other questions. I was going to ask about strengths and what would you not want someone to bring to the table, I guess? What things haven't worked great in the past in terms of working on this process?
I think for the most part, when people are here to learn and listen and be a part of that civic engagement process, that we're just looking for people that want to continue that. I've been on the budget committee for several years before I actually got on the board. I can't even think of somebody who everybody in the room is basically there just to learn and listen and give a perspective. So I think that's the most important thing.
That's good to hear.
All right.
I don't have any other questions.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right. And do we have James? Not yet? Okay.
I'm gonna go peek out in the parking lot.
Okay. Because we're running a little bit ahead. So do we want to go ahead and take a break? Okay, so we will recess and take a break until our next applicant is here.
Mr. Merton was in his truck, so he was willing to come in a little early. Yes, please go ahead and have a seat.
Do we need to call it back to order? Okay, all right. Welcome, James Merton, yes? All right, welcome, and thank you for applying and joining us this evening. The board directors will have some questions for you. Briefly explain your understanding of the public school budgeting process in Oregon and the role of a budget committee member.
So I don't have a ton of Oregon knowledge. I used to work for the school districts about 20 years ago and down in San Diego. So I understand about a little bit about that district, but I understand about the grant funding and the levies and things like that and how it's funded, and then how each school and how everybody allocates it to a topical level, how it gets actually adjusted and put out. I don't have any experience on that. And then and the role of a budget committee member, from what I've got from the handout is that it's or the solicitation was that it would be able to analyze and evaluate different budgetary concerns and make recommendations based off of those concerns and or analyzation, and then work together with a group.
Great. How would you prioritize funding allocations within the school district's budget to ensure the needs of teachers, students, and staff are met? And also, how are the North Clackamas School District strategic plan and the core values applied to budgeting needs?
Great question. So the first part of that, to ensure the needs of the students, teachers, and staff, the first thing is just transparency in the budget process and how it goes is really important. And then prioritize funding allocations. How I would do that is through, because you want to make everything equitable, right? Not just the same for everybody, but you have to bring up those that don't have the same opportunities as others. So we definitely want to figure out ways to creatively work through that so that everyone has an opportunity to get to the same point, regardless of how much extra stuff they need or extra help they need, right? And then the strategic plan and the core values applied to budgeting needs. I actually haven't read the core values, my apologies, but I imagine that they are very student-driven and that students are absolutely the priority in getting everyone to that spot, right? To that sweet spot where everyone is safe and has the same opportunities to learn, and things like that are all going to be addressed in the budget.
Thank you.
Okay, question number 3. How should a school district address transparency and accountability in budgeting and financial decisions? Also, why is this important?
Yeah, this is probably the most important, because if it's not accountable, then we've got issues like the press and parents and things like that that may not be flattering. But that also sometimes happens with accountability. But with accountability, everyone knows exactly what you're getting and how they're going to get it, and that's really, really important. And that way, people can plan and make arrangements and budget, of course, and then also analyze the different ways to find creative needs and creative ways to deal with the budget.
The budgeting process includes a variety of stakeholders, including other budget committee members, district administrators, and the public. Can you describe a situation that demonstrates your ability to work collaboratively with many stakeholders and how you would apply that experience to this role?
Right. So just recently, I actually I work for the U.S. Coast Guard, and I deployed to different disasters, doing different things. And I was recently deployed to the Maui wildfire disaster. And specifically, my role was to recover Lahaina Harbor, bringing in vessel salvage and things like that. And so what I did down there was we had to identify all of the folks that were missing. We had to identify all the vessels that were missing, and we had to create I called it a port coordination group, and we got everybody together, and that included the mayor and the governor and the captain of the port and all of the stakeholders who had potentially lost, or affected stakeholders is probably the best way to say it, to talk about finances and insurance and how we're going to proceed with salving the harbor and what the next steps were there. So that's probably where I excel, is in the pressure cooker of that sort of thing.
What strategies are most successful for engaging and involving the community in a public budgeting or resource allocation process? And how would you contribute to this effort?
So back to transparency, also understanding. A lot of folks may not understand exactly what the budget process is. So outlining the process and how it goes, and while you're in each process, and talking to people, the way I would do it is just like off the cuff, right? A lot of things happen between the margins, between the gray areas. So a lot of the things, you can get done here in the formal setting, but a lot of things also happen with building relationships and working towards collaboration.
Okay, this is the last question. Budgeting often involves making tough decisions about allocating limited resources. Can you provide an example from your experience where you were involved in making difficult financial decisions with limited resources and several high priorities? How did you handle it?
I could use the Lahaina Harbor one again as well, because we had to talk about insurance and we had to federalize that situation. So we also ended up doing a ESF 10, which is like an oil spill FEMA thing, right? So we ended up, which is a different funding string from FEMA, so that we could do all those types of things. So it's the same kind of thing there, but I want to actually bring it back to a different incident that I worked. I worked Hurricane Ida in New Orleans, and we had to recover New Orleans after that hurricane. And down in the navigation channels, they had all the fishing vessel fleet that actually sank in the channel. So organizing and funding and figuring out who's going to pay for and how we're going to pay for it and what resources to order and things like that were really important there, because we really needed to get that open, because there's Bollinger Shipyards, which is a famous high-profile shipyard there, and they wanted to be open. The grain industry wanted to prioritize electrical regeneration or repowering of a grain facility over the general population. So we had to reach to the governor and ask about can we do this, right? And now we're asking him to make the choice between his citizens and this grain facility. So it was definitely interesting and high stakes. We ended up fortunately getting what we asked for. So, because it was grain season, and then this is like a $24 billion a year grain export facility down there. So the commerce is where the rest of my work goes. I do disaster recovery, but it's maritime disasters, but it's maritime economics. So it's we always have to talk about the dollar amounts and the different types of commodities and the supply chain impacts and things like that, upstream and downstream.
All right, thank you. Do you have any questions for us?
What are the next steps if this is favorable, I guess?
So yes, we will finish our interviews this evening, and then the board directors will vote at the meeting, the open meeting on November 9th at the regular board meeting.
Okay,
All
great.
right. Okay.
Great, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Great, yeah, no problem.
Now we just need to see if our next candidate is ready. Yes, that would be great. Thank you. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hi.
All right, welcome, Jennifer Pope. Thank you so much. Welcome, and thank you for applying. We will start with some questions for you.
Okay.
So briefly explain your understanding of the public school budgeting process in Oregon and the role of a budget committee member.
Well, my understanding of the budget committee process in Oregon is that I'd like a deeper understanding, but what I gather from my experience so far on the website is that the district presents a budget, which is going to be, of course, based on multiple factors like state funding and things like that. And then the budget committee then has to take that and evaluate it, get public feedback, and determine, where to prioritize things and how to make it work. The budget committee member, as my understanding is, the role would be to be that person on the committee to help make those hard decisions, to listen to the community, find out where their priorities lie and how you can make that mesh with the funds that are available, which are never enough, and the needs that we have as an institution, particularly considering things like, funds that can't be reallocated for something else that are restricted and things, and make it work to be as successful as we can.
Thank you.
All right. How would you prioritize funding allocations within the school district's budget to ensure the needs of students, teachers, and staff are met? And also, how are the NCSD's strategic plan and the core values applied to budgeting needs?
I think it's a tough one, and I imagine it varies every time you go over a new budget. Right now, the strategic plan, the core values, I have a child at home who's just started kindergarten, and his school is very good about constantly talking about what the core values are and sending messages home on parent view about that. So I feel fortunate that I'm pretty familiar with, the core values of care and respect and integrity, equity, and empowerment. I think that's what they are, which is great because, those are the things that are needed to achieve that strategic plan. How do you do that with funding? I think it has to be student-centered, of course, and I think that, again, that's going to vary from term to term. I imagine I work in a community college, and I imagine that the elementary school, high school, middle school districts are all dealing with the same situation where our funding has not necessarily caught up with our need in terms of students, still needing maybe a little extra help coming back from, pandemic and remote learning and things like that. And so I would imagine that where to allocate funds is a little bit more difficult right now than it might have been pre-pandemic and than it might be in a few years. I think the priorities have to be towards trying to meet student learning needs in a variety of ways so that you are doing it in a way that's equitable for different learners, and you have to allocate them for personnel as well, because if you don't have teachers and staff members there who are happy and well, maybe not happy, but feel valued and effective and like they're making a difference, then it's puzzle doesn't come together. So
Question number 3, how should a school district address transparency and accountability in budgeting and financial decisions? Also, why is this important?
Well, I think everybody wants to know where their tax dollars are going and where the state funds are going. So I think why it's important is because people like to know, and they might not necessarily know how to get that information themselves. I think in this current moment that we're in right now, having people have a deeper understanding of the budget would make it more likely that the levy would pass, for example. If they knew what we stand to lose if the levy doesn't pass, that would be a critical moment. As far as how to address the transparency and accountability, I feel like the transparency is it's transparent if you can find the budget and access it and understand it. And so that would probably be, the key piece there would be, how to make sure that that transparency and accountability is more accessible and more visible to the public so that they understand what we're working with.
Okay, question 4. The budgeting process includes a variety of stakeholders, including other budget committee members, district administrators, and the public. Can you describe a situation that demonstrates your ability to work collaboratively with many stakeholders and how you would apply that experience to this role?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is, so I work for Clackamas Community College and have for quite some time now, and I was around prior to the bond getting passed in 2014, and I was part of the team that went through and we did a inquiry-based process for figuring out basically how to get the community to buy into the bond. And in that process, we interviewed, lengthy listening interviews and conversations with students, with community members, with foundation members, with retired faculty, with current faculty, with staff, everybody that we could. And I think that working collaboratively with that many people requires just having an honest interest in having their participation and having their buy-in and being able to listen to them and find out what people need. I think that when people feel like their involvement is valued and important, then they are more likely to stay involved and participate. How would I apply that experience to this role? I think it's all similar. You need to be accessible to people and know that they need to know that you're going to listen and that you're going to value what they have to say and what they're bringing to the table as well.
Question 5, what strategies are most successful for engaging and involving the community in a public budgeting or resource allocation process, and how would you contribute to this effort?
This is a great question, and one that I'm not entirely sure I know the answer to without being involved directly in the process yet. But as I said before, I think most of the information is out there, and it's a matter of connecting it with the public and connecting it in a way that they understand it and feel like it's for them to look at. I found out about this opportunity for the budget committee through that Parent View app that, messages get put through to my phone every night about one thing or another. And I think if I had just happened across it on the website that there was a budget committee member, that you were looking for budget committee members, I might have just scrolled right past it. And asking people to seek out the information is the tough part. I think that we need to find a better way to get it to people, whether that's, bringing it to the PTA meeting, presenting it in a way that's not a 186-page budget document, something that's a little bit more broken down, making ourselves more accessible, and the process more accessible to the general person. And again, I think it comes back to making sure that people know that their involvement in it is important and has value, that you're not just saying, here's the budget if you want to read it, and if you have anything to say about it, that it's important that people get involved and put their information and priorities and things like that on the table.
Okay, last question. Budgeting often involves making tough decisions about allocating limited resources. Can you provide an example from your experience where you were involved in making difficult financial decisions with limited resources and several high priorities? How did you handle it?
My first thought is, haven't a lot of us had to do this over the last couple of years with our personal budgets? But in a more institutional way, I have been involved for years on the budget committee for my union local, and we frequently have to do that, although there are fewer moving pieces. It's always a matter of, determining what's absolutely necessary, what's restricted, what, we can't not pay our NEA dues. That's money that can't be moved around, but when it comes down to deciding what's most important, I think, again, we've always tried to get information from the public and from, whoever is the budget impacting, what are the priorities, so that we're not just, determining for ourselves what we individually on the committee think is most important. We need to know that everybody else is on as much of the same page as we can be. We have had to make difficult decisions. I guess the other example that I can think of is, at the start of the pandemic, when everybody went remote. So I work for the science department, and lab science is required, and we had to make really difficult decisions about how do we get labs home to students and give them that hands-on experience that they're required to have to go on to a university or, to get their AAOT or whatever it may be. And how do we do it in a way that they can afford it and that we can afford it? Because, we were keenly aware of the fact that, students couldn't necessarily go out to the store and buy supplies. They couldn't pay extra money for a lab kit that they hadn't planned on buying. So there were a lot of tough decisions that had to be made in terms of what is absolutely essential, what can we give, what can we ask for, and how to balance it.
All right, thank you. And do you have any questions for us?
I am curious, especially given the nature of some of these questions, how much public involvement do you usually experience in the budgeting process? So when you have it open for public testimony, is there a lot of public testimony often? Is it more dependent on what's going on at the time, or?
You mean public comment at the budget message reading?
Anything. Well, so my understanding is that once the budget's prepared, there is, a couple meetings where the public gets to offer their input on it. And is there a lot of public and, interest in trying to be involved in that process and having a say in how things are allocated before it's finalized, or?
And I think as far as just hearing from people outside of the budget committee, that varies year to year, whether we receive emails or whether we receive actual public comment at the budget message reading. I would say that it just varies year to year.
Yeah, I would imagine, especially depending on what's going on in the climate. Okay, I think I already heard at the beginning what the next steps were, and that would have been my other question. And I think that's all I have.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. So we would like to thank all of the candidates that were able to be here tonight. And do we have any positive feedback that we'd like to share about our candidates this evening? Directors?
I'll just share that I'm so appreciative that all of these people contributed their time and energy and effort to be really thoughtful about the questions that we asked and what we're looking for on this committee. And I just really enjoyed hearing all of their diverse experience and thoughts about what they could bring to Budget Committee.
All right. Any other comments? All right. Director Bauer? No.
I guess I would just say, yeah, their vast experience in lots of different occupations, and there's a good depth of knowledge about budgets too, but their willingness to serve is so important. And I'm grateful for all the people that applied. I mean, it's more than we've ever had that I've ever been aware of. So, I hope they continue to stay engaged and we see them, apply again.
All right, thank you. We will be voting at the next board meeting. Please give any notes or scoring you may have made during this process to Donna, either tonight or at the next board meeting. It is now 7:02, and this public meeting of the North Clackamas School District Board of Directors is adjourned. Have a good evening.